So let's get started. What I would like to cover is going to be a very sad story, but I think it's really important, and that is the story of the HeLa cells, known as Henrietta Lacks, and what those cells really represent, and why it's very important to understand the truth about those cells, which really has never been covered. At least to my understanding, no one's really talking about, because most people don't understand what those cells really represent, and that's what I want to talk about today. So just so you understand, there's actually a film that's going to be coming out regarding the HeLa cells. It's based on the story of the immortal cells of Henrietta Lacks. She was an African American woman that was born in around 1920. And I'll talk about her story in a minute. But there's going to be a movie that's going to cover her life. My understanding is Oprah Winfrey is going to be starring in it. It's going to be on HBO. I think it's set to premiere probably toward either November or December time frame. But at any rate, on HBO. Definitely something that our people want to watch, because it's definitely going to be an interesting story. It's one of the most important medical stories of I would say, the history. I think one of the most important stories in the history of medicine, period. And the reason being is because of the story and what it's really about, and what those cells represent. It's the consequences of science, mad science. And also it helps you to understand the history of our people. So before we get started on that story, I just want to cover this verse in Proverbs. I think it's really, I think it's an interesting verse that is very, I think it's relative to this story. So I'm going to read it. It's Proverbs. The verse is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 32, and it says, "To the Most High, the devious are an abomination, but the upright are close to him." Now that verse means a lot. It covers a lot. It tells us as the Most High's people a lot, if you are Hebrew. I'm not going to delve too deep into what that really means, but I'm going to tell you in a nutshell what it means is that our people have a special relationship with the Most High, and He has revealed things to us that no one else, none of the other nations know. First and foremost, His way of life that He has designated for our people, known as, the instructions He gave us, which known in the Christian world they call the law. Okay. He didn't reveal that to any other nations but us, our people, and so much more. Okay, but that's what that verse means, that we have a special relationship with Him. And it talks about to the Most High, the devious are an abomination. Okay, so let's talk about what that really means and how relative it is to the story. And there's other. And I'm going to cover as we progress other translations of that verse in Proverbs, because there's certain, that verse also reveals a group of people who try to hide through their translation who they're referring to, the devious, in that verse. Okay, because they're just not talking about a bunch of devious people. That verse covers exactly and identifies who those people really are that are abomination to the Most High, and we're going to talk about that a little later. That's very heavy, very important for our people to understand. But let's talk about the story of we'll cover that later, but let's talk about the story of Henrietta Lacks. So the story of Henrietta Lacks, if any of you heard of the story, I'm going to just cover it. What the story is about is, it was an African American woman. She was born in 1920, and she lived in Roanoke, Virginia. She lived in Baltimore for a number of years, and around 1951, she she was admitted to the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland for a tumor she had. And when she was admitted into the hospital, she was pronounced that the tumor was pronounced it was tumorous or cancerous, excuse me. So she was pronounced with cervical cancer, and they took actually a biopsy of the tumor and discovered that, you know, her cells, usually what happens, typically cells, when someone takes a cell sample, it could be a swab, a cheek swab or whatever, draw blood, you know, they could draw blood, but when someone usually takes a cell culture in the lab and they for study, you know, your cells, typically cells tend to die off in a matter of days. Okay, so they don't, you know, continue to, you know, I guess generate in a lab, whereas they found that her cells didn't die off in a matter of days, that her cells actually kept replicating, reproducing themselves, and they were able to live longer than normal cells. And that's where they came the I guess the title of immortal cells, because they could freeze her cells and thaw them out and continue to do work on them, and they would continue to replicate and regenerate themselves. So that's what was very fascinating about her cells, and there were no other cell lines that have ever done that in history. So history of medicine. So at any rate, what is very sad about the story is Henrietta Lacks, they were not able to save her, and she died at the age of 31 diagnosed with cervical cancer. And what they did was they continued to experiment, and they took more samples of her cell line, and they experimented on her cells first of all, without her consent or even her family's consent. And they continued to do that. You know, they took advantage of her because she was, you know, she was an African American woman, and, you know, and she was poor. And that was, you know, in the 50s, you know, what was going on in terms of the racism. So it was a very sad story. But let me help you understand why this story is very, very important and significant. As we were talking about, and I think I covered this in a couple of my previous videos, about the fallen angels, you know, the Nephilim seed, you know, that there are people that will sit here and say to this day, oh, you know, the serpent, you know, the offspring of the fallen angels and the Nephilim are gone, you know, the giants and all that, but those people are still on the planet today, the descendants of the fallen angels, and their serpent, you know, their serpent seed line, or their seed line, you know. And the reason, and how do you know all of this? Well, unfortunately, this is an example of those, you know, of that seed line, you know, or that seed that has continued on the planet, that is continuing. And you have to understand, to understand all of this, now before you refute what I'm saying, I'm going to show you and help you to understand. I'm going to understand why I'm telling you that the immortal cell line, okay, known as the HeLa cells, is an example of this fallen angel DNA that is still on this planet. So all of this that's going on, and even in today's world, you have to understand, has all been predicated on rebellion of a group of fallen angels, including Lucifer. So he has children on this planet, you know, as well as his brothers, okay, and this is the fallen angel seed line. Okay, and that is an example. Okay, the HeLa cells, because Henrietta Lacks' immortal cell line is known as the HeLa cells in modern medicine, is an example of the fallen angel, you know, bloodline, DNA or bloodline. Now, before you refute what I am saying to you, I am going to help you to understand the history of the cell line and the truth. Why I'm telling you that that is exactly representative of what it is. So I want you to watch this video and I will show you, okay, and then we'll talk about it. So this is a video I'm going to show you regarding her family history, okay? And let's talk about that, and we'll talk about it after we watch this video. It's going to take it's like literally a 1-2 minute video, okay? And I'm going to play it right now for you.
In 1951, a woman died in Baltimore in America. She was called Henrietta Lacks. These are cells from her body. They were taken from her just before she died. They have been growing and multiplying ever since. There are now billions of these cells in laboratories around the world. If massed together, they would weigh 400 times her original weight. These cells have transformed modern medicine, but they also became caught up in the politics of our age. They shaped the policies of countries and of presidents. They even became involved in the Cold War. Because scientists were convinced that in her cells lay the secret of how to conquer death. In 1860, Plantation owner in Virginia, Benjamin Lacks, took a black mistress from among his workers. She bore him 2 children. They took their father's name. For 3 generations, the Lacks family worked in the field. Then, in 1942, his great-grandmother, Henrietta Lacks, decided to move to the city. She took her husband and family to Baltimore. It was wartime. There was money to be made. She was known to all her friends as Melanin.
Oh my goodness, I don't think.
So I'm back. So I wanted to stop the video right there because it's okay. So why is that important? I don't know if you can hear me. Hopefully you guys can hear me here. Testing 1 2. So I wanted to pick up where we left off, but I wanted to show you that video. And the reason why I want to show you that video is because a soundbite from that video to help you understand that if you understand, what it was talking about was in her history, her great grandfather Benjamin Lacks was he was a Caucasian, a white man, and when the guy said, well, he took a black mistress, let's face it, women of color, more than likely if she was of Negro ancestry, Hebrew ancestry, women of color did not have, Hebrew women in those days on the plantation did not have a choice when a white slave owner took them as mistresses. They didn't take them, they raped them. Okay, so let's cut to the chase on that. He didn't come out in the fields and say, hey, do you want to be my mistress? He raped her. Okay, so that again, this is a white man's narrative of the history of slavery. Okay, so we're just again, it's about the truth, and they tend to lie by omission. They'll tell you what you want to know. They tell you their version of the truth and what they want you to know, which is really no truth at all. So at any rate, her great-great-grandmother was raped and on the plantation, and as a result of that, he fathered 2 children, okay, with her great-great-grandmother, and as a result of that, remember, white folks classify them, white folks who classify themselves as Caucasian, they have recessive genes. So their genes are passed from one generation to another. And some of that gene pool, unfortunately, by that unholy union, I hate to say it, because of what the Caucasian, man, his gene pool represents, okay, which is the corrupt gene pool, right? The corrupt DNA of, the serpent seed, okay, because his genes were corrupt. unfortunately, because of that union with a melanated person, a person of color, a Hebrew woman, unfortunately that union created this genetic mutation on a completely just a whole nother level of genetic mutation. And the reason being is you have to understand this alien DNA that they call alien DNA, known as the Neanderthal DNA or Neanderthal DNA, they have no idea. It's highly unstable, so they have no idea what that gene pool, in terms of the genes, all the various gene and what those genes really represent. I mean, but the mutations are kind of abound. I mean, as in the ancient world, the initial mutation caused what? It caused what they call it today, gigantism, gigantism rather, sorry. And it caused other mutations as well. As part of that mutation, some of the people were born with 6 toes, 6 feet. There's still people in Europe that are running around with 6 toes. I think I covered that in another video, the apocalypse video. There's still people running around as a result of the genetic corruption of that DNA with 6 toes, 6 hands, or excuse me, 6 fingers rather, 6 hands, but extra digits. So it just helps you to understand it's highly unstable. So as a result, it created this genetic mutation that they just, didn't anticipate. And as a result of that, it created this immortal cell line. I mean, we don't know what aside from his genes being corrupt, we don't know what that guy was into. He could have been a vampire for all we know. I mean, really, of that vampire bloodline, because that vampire bloodline, those they call vampire, that's real, by the way. Those films that you see based on, Dracula and all of that, that whole history of that, a man that lived, in the Middle Ages, in Transylvania, in was it Romania or Hungary? That whole story is real. Okay, but again, that is of the fallen angel bloodline, even the vampirism. But we don't know. I mean, again, that's all speculation. But the point is that it is a corrupt DNA. The union of that DNA caused this immortal cell line, and as a result of that, what they did was they used those cells to see how they could. They did it for scientific research to try to preserve their own. It was all about preserving their own, figuring out a way to preserve their existence on this planet. Because, like I said, because they are not entirely human, that they are part spirit. The more they keep, intermarrying with each other, they're just, there's, less humanity that is left in their DNA, in their gene pool, and as a result of that, they have what we call cellular decrepitation. Okay, that exists in the race that's classified as Caucasian. So they have got to find a way to, it comes down to self-preservation, to find a way to preserve themselves, extend their mortality rate on this planet. Now, why is this all significant? What they did was they were using her cells for genetic research in order to do that, to preserve their mortality rate, extend their mortality rate on this planet. But before we talk about that and we go into that to show you the further proofs of all of that, I want to cover this Time magazine article. There was a cover that was done on Time magazine around 2003. It was done by Time magazine. As you can see, it was titled "Solving the Mysteries of DNA." Now, what is really interesting about this particular cover, they've done a cover with the whole Adam and Eve theme before, and that was, if you recall that cover, it was back in the 80s. And in that cover, they showed Adam and Eve, but Adam and Eve on that cover were a black male, or what they would call a black male, a man of color, and a black female. okay, is Adam and Eve. They depict it on the cover of Time. And this was like an 80 issue back in the 80s. Now, what's interesting, this 2003, it was March 2003, the issue, if you ever want to check it. What's interesting about this one is, now I want you to look at this. It is showing you a tree, okay? There's a tree, and the tree is shaped like what? DNA. All right, DNA. It's wrapped around both the man there, the white man here, that is being depicted as so-called Adam, and the female being depicted as so-called Eve happens to be a woman of color, African American, or what they would call so-called black. Now, what is really, and they're holding hands. Now, what is really very, very strange about this whole thing is, if you notice in this cover, okay, this is not, brothers and sisters, this cover is not by coincidence. Why would you think they would show a cover of Time magazine in Adam and Eve, but they are showing you a biracial Adam and Eve, okay, a black woman and a white man together as Adam and Eve? There is something they're trying to tell you behind all of this. First of all, they're telling you the truth about what happened in the Garden of Eden, okay, as a result of that. Now, you have to understand what this man represents, okay? Alright? So, if you understand what happened in the Garden of Eve, right, you understand, let me just, recap the story. I covered this in another video. I covered this in the video of the Nephilim, I think, that Satan seduced, okay, Lucifer seduced Eve, okay, and as a result, he beguiled her, he seduced her, and he impregnated her, and so his firstborn was by Eve, okay, who they call Eve. Her real name wasn't Eve, but in the garden, but who they called Eve, okay, and as a result, his firstborn was Cain. He had a son, Cain, and he also had, they were twins, Cain and Abel, okay. So that is what happened as a result of his seducing, and the reason why he did it was to, that was his, really his goal was to corrupt the human DNA, to corrupt humanity, okay. But remember, Adam and Eve also had other children together, and their other child, after the death of their son Abel, was Seth, and he was, the firstborn of Ada, or who they call Adam, and as a result came the children of Adam, okay, who were the children of the human race, okay, who they call human race on this planet, the offspring of Adam. So, but what's interesting about this cover is that they show you a biracial Adam and Eve, and that is not a coincidence, okay? So it all stems from the Garden of Eden, okay? That's what this is all significant of, okay? I just told you the story. And the other thing, so it's twofold why they, are depicting this on the cover and showing you, it's symbolic of what happened, what they're telling you what happened in the Garden of Eden. And number two, the other aspect of it that's really important to understand is they're also, this is all programming, okay, this is all part of their programming of their, what they call their mixed agenda. This is all part of the race mixing agenda. They want more, they want the union, and notice how they, on purpose, they depict a black Eve and a white Adam, because they want that genetic union, okay, the race mixing agenda. They want that union between male and female, okay. They want to push that DNA, and this is not a coincidence, brothers and sisters. And even the fact that they chose a black Eve and they have a white Adam, Okay, because that is really actually even the direction of the mixing agenda that they want. Okay, so that is very, very important to understand. That's why they're pushing that, and that's why they're showing you that on the cover of Time magazine, because it's all part of the race mixing agenda. Okay, because they need that DNA in order to survive, the DNA of the offspring of Eve. Okay, of her children, the human children that's left on this planet, that is representative of this, so-called African American or black female that you would call, so-called. Okay, so that's really important to understand what's going on, brothers and sisters. Now, let's keep this going. So, I want to cover one more thing, and then we'll pick up the rest next week. So let me cover this part of the video because I think you're going to find it very important. So this is a conference regarding the HeLa cells, the immortal cells of Henrietta Lacks, and this is the life of Henrietta Lacks. And this guy that's you're going to hear right now, he is part of this, he's actually one of the, I guess, doctors who has done laboratory research using and utilizing the HeLa cells in his laboratory. And this guy is a real piece of work, okay, this serpent here. But, hey, I want you to hear this because what I find very interesting about, again, white folks is it's not what they tell you, it's what they don't tell you. They lie by omission. Okay, I like to say they lie by admission and omission. They like to admit things and then they like to omit things, meaning they like to tell you certain things and then there's things that they don't tell you and they leave out for you to read between the lines to to figure out the truth. So let's play this and then we're going to cover what this all means and why it's very important. And I'm going to show you. Pay attention closely to this guy, okay?
What the HeLa cells did was allow for a just huge array of experiments to be done on any number of different topics. You can see from that, if we look at the HeLa history, as Nancy mentioned, right after the discovery, within a year of the ability to propagate the HeLa cells, the polio vaccine had been developed using the HeLa cells as a model. HeLas were one of the first living things to be cells to be put into space. In 1965, they were used to be able to show that you could fuse two different cells together in culture. 1984, the discovery of the HPV virus as the link to cervical cancer. The Nobel Prize was given for that particular discovery. 1986, all of the AIDS research, the majority of it was done using the HeLa cells as the model to affect the AIDS virus. 89, 2000, it goes on. So, what I want to
So I'm back. So what I want to cover here is why that's really important. Okay, so what he did, you're going to notice in here is, let's see here. Okay, I want to try to take the video a little bit forward. So when he talks, what you'll notice is he'll talk about all of the advances, that were made with the cell line. He talks about the polio vaccine. Now that's a big deal. Remember, he's covering the things that he wants you to know that benefited, white folks, his people, okay, Caucasian folks. So the polio vaccine, he mentions, 1952. The fact that they use the HeLa cells in space. Now that's extremely significant. We'll cover that in a second. Why? Human mouse hybrid. Now we're going to talk about the evils behind. So in other words, we'll talk about that in a minute. But mouse hybrid, talked about the HPV and it's linked to cervical cancer. Somebody won a Nobel Prize that benefited from, this research. Just the many people that made billions, millions and billions of pharmaceutical companies. That's why they don't like to talk about the figure, and they tend to downplay the number to millions when it's really, you and I know it's billions, especially when you're talking about pharmaceuticals. And by the way, there's been over 70,000, I think 74,000 studies that have been done, more than 74,000 studies, continue to this very day, using the immortal cell line. Okay, so you can do the math on that, multiply it. They even sell it online. I think they were like $10,000, the actual culture samples. If you can multiply that with 74,000 studies over a period of, 60 some years, really, we're talking billions of dollars. It doesn't take, it's not rocket science to figure that out. It wasn't millions, it was billions. Okay, the reason why they're downplaying that number is because they never told the family. Okay, so and then they talk about the other studies, HIV, and then but what's interesting is he doesn't cover this one topic, telomerase. And that is really important to understand. Why didn't he cover that, telomerase, and what that really means? So I'm going to continue to play this and why that is significant. We'll talk about that in a second. But before I go there, what I want you to understand is, so this cell line, in terms of the research that was done, as you can see, some of it was done obviously for good, again, to benefit whom? To people classify themselves as white folks, Caucasians. It was used to benefit them, the polio vaccine. So it was used for some good, right, to benefit them, but it was also used for wickedness, and it was used for evil as well, and for bad. And how do you know this? Well, let's talk about they were when you begin crossbreeding human DNA with mouse cells, creating a mouse hybrid, a human mouse hybrid. Okay, so what did our Father in heaven say about mixing unlike seed? Is this not abomination to the Most High? Okay, this was talked about in Deuteronomy. Okay, this was a transgression of the law. He warned our people and told our people, do not mix unlike seed. This is why our people were instructed not to combine or crossbreed. We couldn't even mix, our ancestors could not even mix two different seeds in a field, in terms of vegetation, let alone anything else. We couldn't even combine fabrics, different types of fabrics, cotton with, wool, for example. We couldn't mix those fabrics together. Couldn't sew them together or mix those fabrics. So, crossbreeding, obviously is a given that we were not to mix unlike seed. And of course, what are they doing? They're crossbreeding. Okay, so they used it also for bad, for evil. They also used it for other studies. Well, he tells you what it was used there for, so more than likely it was probably used to even create viruses. And we're not going to, you can guess what virus I'm talking about because he's covering it right there in his presentation. I'll leave that up to you. They say, well, they were trying to use it to stop it, but that virus was grown in a lab, okay? It was bioengineered. So more than likely, who knows, that was probably, one of the things they did. So, with it. But let's talk about telomerase. That's really important. Now, he did not cover that. You notice he didn't mention it, okay, even though he has it in a slide. So we're going to go on, and he'll mention it in a few minutes, and I'm going to tell you why that's significant. So give me a second. I'm going to keep playing it.
Had been developed using the HeLa cells as a model. HeLas were one of the first living things to be cells put into space. In 1965, they were used to be able to show that you could fuse two different cells together in culture. 1984, the discovery of the HPV virus as the link to cervical cancer. The Nobel Prize was given for that particular discovery. 1986, all of the AIDS research, the majority of it was done using the HeLa cells as the model to infect the AIDS virus. 89, 2000, it goes on. So what better understand the aspect of the quote-unquote immortality. So what you need to understand is that there are no HeLa cells that have been consistently living in a culture dish since 1951. Okay? So the immortality is simply based on the ability to store these cells indefinitely and then bring them back to life and allow them to propagate. So the way in which we do that is by storing the cells in liquid nitrogen. This is a liquid nitrogen tank that you see behind you, and each one of the tanks has a cane that goes into the liquid nitrogen, and liquid nitrogen is, minus 340 degrees Fahrenheit. So the cells are frozen, and up here on the corner, this is a vial cell. This is about 1 million cells per year. So each of these boxes is stored in liquid nitrogen. I have 2 of these in my laboratory, and we probably have 100 different types of cells that we store this way. So when you want to work on the cells, you simply bring this back out, and you thaw them, and you roll them in the culture dish. And the HeLa cells are remarkable because they continue to divide for as long as you want to work on them versus a normal cell. You do this in a cell culture hood. Here's a couple pictures of the cells. You can see them growing on the dish. What makes the cells immortal is the fact that they are infected with the HPV virus. So the virus allows the cells to insert it into various different chromosomes and therefore allow the cells to go outside the range of what normally would control cell division. The other interesting component is that these cells have 82 chromosomes, which are way more than the 46 that we normally have. And this word telomerase that you probably read in the book, the telomerase is an enzyme that usually controls how we age and how many times our cells can divide. So every time our cells divide in our body, the chromosomes get a little shorter until the cell basically commits suicide in many cases. But what happens is that in these types of cells, and there are a number of other immortal cell lines now, the telomerase enzyme allows for repair of those chromosomes so that they don't shorten. That way the cell can continue to divide. So I think I will end with that, and I will take questions.
Okay, so as he had mentioned the telomerase and what the significance of the telomerase is. Now, he covered it there in that particular part of his presentation. Now, why is that significant? Now, I got to tell you, I want to talk about that in a nutshell. What telomerase is that you have to understand something. As part of our genetic makeup, we have something, people of color, okay, have something called melanin. And melanin, we have been taught to believe, just formulates the pigment and determines the pigment of our hair, our skin tone, our eyes, and that's pretty much what it does. But if you really go on to study melanin and understand what melanin means, melanin is not just determined. It's just not about pigmentation. It's not a pigmentation. Melanin is throughout your entire body, including in your organs. Okay, it is actually the biological essence of your life, of your life. How should I say, your life force, in a sense. This is something that we are not told to understand. Now, how do you know all of this? Now, and where does telomerase play a role into that? So it was interesting. I was watching a video. Regarding Dr. Welsing, the late Dr. Welsing, Frances Welsing. May she rest in peace. May her soul rest in peace, Father in heaven, the Most High. That she was covering in her video. She was talking about melanin, and her presentation was during the Melanin conference, and I'll tell you later what that's all about. But in the Melanin conference, she talked about the melanocytes that is part of what makes up, our melanin. And as part of that melanin, there is an enzyme that is produced known as telomerase. Okay, and that is the enzyme that is produced from the melanocytes of the melanin. that we all have people of color. Now, why is that important, this telomerase? And this is why he talked about it. What was he telling you? Okay, so there's been studies done on telomerase that essentially what it does is it slows down the aging process. I mean, there's an article here that talks about telomerase reversing the aging process. This is the thing that's very significant in people of color, and in our, in our very makeup. We joke about it with each other and we say, hey, I'm sure you've heard that saying, black don't crack. But there's actually there's truth to that. I mean, there's this tremendous truth to it. Why we don't age at the rate that a person, a Caucasian person, or a person that is fairer in complexion, or just to say a non-melanated person, the way they age. Okay, we age differently. We tend to we don't typically show our age. I mean, our aging process is slower. Okay, so we don't age as rapidly as a non-melanated person. A person lacking melanin, which would be a person classified as white or Caucasian. So that's the significance of telomerase. So that's why they have done studies on that. And there's a lot of other benefits. So what was really core in the DNA of the HeLa cells also was that melanin. And again, it's that culmination of that melanin and that mutation, unfortunately. But what that melanin also gave them was they found a way of giving themselves, preserving their mortality rate, and that caused obviously some benefits for them and some tremendous non-benefits for us. And I'm going to stop right there, and we're going to kind of go into that a little bit later, and we'll cover this next week. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll continue this on next week. May the Most High bless.